Whoops. Oh, you know what we need to do?
What?
This needs to be over here.
No. We have that clicker.
Really? Okay.
We have 5 or 6 people that are already online viewing, so they wanted to have something up so they knew that they were on the right
Can I flip so I can just make sure I'm doing this okay?
Of course.
That back to the, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
This is the only place, the HDMI port in order to get on
I don't have those, but I'm having the equivalent, whatever that is.
I'm going to make sure that I'm reading guests and getting them on board. The Peter is here, but we are listening to that.
Ooh, you know what I need to see now? We're all set on the.
They are back with the Peter.
Famous Dr. Soul, is this correct?
Yeah.
Hey, Jen. My daughter Jen. Hey, are you wearing a glove this morning? Holy moly! That's fine.
Hi, Jenny.
Wait, Louis. You give her a joke. Give her a joke. Louis, I put you on here.
Oh, okay. So where do you want to put sand?
Say, why don't you want to sit with Jenny and Donna?
The good doctor chair.
Yeah. So that's been a lot over the year. Yeah. She, the first trimester.
Here.
We're gonna need the mic, but
I'm going to pull it out from there and take it around the audience.
I'm good.
Yes.
Did you meet Dr. first?
Yes. I actually.
I'm Avery. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I saw you earlier.
What time is it now? 8:45.
It's 8:10.
Oh, we go another 5 minutes.
Are you guys presenting this
Yes.
slideshow as well? Okay.
Yes.
The clicker works with it.
It does. Perfect. Thank you.
I've checked it.
No, good.
Sorry, when it's over, there's another slideshow.
Yes.
Just tell me when you're ready and I'll change it.
When it's over, he knows this. He's the director. So when this is over, there's another slide. She'll put that up.
The same picture again. Okay. And that stage for 6 other sequels. Okay. Hopefully we will agree. And then I will say something like, now we'll and this guy right here can help you. Rachel. You're gonna what?
Yeah.
I did. They sent me home. You can keep talking. That's all the people we just have here.
We'll start in about 5 minutes.
Across from Miami.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to everybody in our beautiful alumni house and those of you who are watching live streaming in Davis Auditorium and at other points around the community and the country. We welcome you to what would normally be our pediatric grand round session, but this morning I think is an even grander rounds as we celebrate the life of Dr. Gerald Lucey, aka Jerry, who, as we all know, sadly passed away on December 10th of this past year. My name is Louis First. I'm the chair of the Department of Pediatrics and chief of our University of Vermont Children's Hospital. And again, I'd like to welcome you and really thank you for joining us for what is going to be a celebration of someone who made an enormous contribution to our department, our children's hospital, to the field of pediatrics, and in particular to the field of neonatology, in ways that have made, and I think we all know, continue to make a difference in the lives of infants, children, families, and all of us who have been fortunate to know and learn from Jerry. Now, if you're here today, or you're watching today, and you did not know Jerry Lucey personally, I hope that what we share over the next hour or two will perhaps make everyone realize that his legacy truly lives on in all of us as a result of the many contributions he made to our field. Now, I'm going to have the opportunity in a few minutes to give you a better sense of just who Jerry Lucey was, is, and will always be. But I'd like to turn the proceedings this morning over to someone who was one of Jerry's dearest friends, someone who admired him, I believe, more than I can put into words, and who felt so close to Jerry that he named Jerry the godfather of his children. Please welcome our R. James McKay Green and Gold Professor, Dr. Marshall, a.k.a. Buzz Land, who will serve as the moderator for this morning's celebration. Dr. Land.
Thanks, everybody, for being here this morning. You know, when Vin Scully, the famous baseball announcer, exceptional baseball announcer, was calling his final game, he said, "Don't be sad because it's over. Smile because it happened." And that's our goal this morning as we, remember the amazing life of Jerry Lucey. Jerry didn't like funerals or end-of-life celebrations, and he certainly would not have embraced this one. In fact, I think even if he could be here, he wouldn't be here. But let's do our best to share some stories that would make him smile. A little irreverence is okay, as you know who knew Jerry. I also want to let you know that I feel privileged to be standing up here this morning. All of you had some connection with Jerry, and although my comments will be personal, I hope that they reflect the same experiences and the fondness that you had for Jerry as well. Jerry often paid tribute to the incredible impact of his own mentors. I had many medical mentors, some in this room today. Two of them stood out as my heroes. Of course, they both taught me lots about medicine and lots about life, both of them. No one taught me more about medicine than Jim McKay. And no one taught me more about life than my other hero, Jerry Lucey. He taught me and others in so many ways. One way he taught was through his words to live by. And one of his favorite expressions of those words to live by was, "Life is short, eat dessert first." He validated this once when we were dining in Oxford, England, by ordering with a huge smile on his face a brownie sundae for dinner and then a milkshake for dessert. He especially liked chocolate chip cookies and said that he loved my wife Donna's the most. Of course, he probably said that to everyone who made cookies, so he'd be sure to get another one. But in any event, to honor Jerry's philosophy in that regard and to get the morning rolling, I'm going to start by taking a bite out of one of Donna's chocolate chips. So here's to Jerry. Excuse me for a moment while I savor this, Greg. Now, one of Jerry's many wonderful qualities was his generosity. So we're going to pass out one of Donna's cookies to each of you as you walk out this morning. Sorry to Jerry, no milk, but savor Jerry as you enjoy your cookie, if you would. Jerry and I have been friends for over 45 years. I know this number exactly because we met in early October 1972 the same week that he married Ingela and I married Donna. He was very happy, and I was too. I was up in Burlington looking at the Vermont residency program and met with Doctors McKay and Lucey, and I was enamored with the program and with both of them, and moved to Vermont from Cincinnati Children's Hospital 8 months later. Colleagues in Cincinnati, who of course knew of Jerry, were aglow at the thought that I'd be working with Dr. Lucey. He had just a few years earlier published his important papers on phototherapy. You are going, they said, to work with the Prince of Light. The Prince of Light, indeed, I was to learn. As I said, no one has taught me more about life than Jerry Lucey. Jerry was the Prince of Light in neonatology with many innovations, and Dr. First will describe his many medical career accomplishments as a true pioneer in neonatology in a moment. But I was to learn that he was also the Prince of Light in so many other ways. To so many people, especially to young people, especially to medical students, residents, junior faculty, friends, and family. He thrived on encouraging others to develop their own ideas with a little tickle from him, and in getting others excited about things in medicine and in life. He tried to teach others to push themselves, to push the envelope, and tried to think outside, to have us all try to think outside every kind of box and to dream. And that wasn't just about medicine. It was all aspects of life's journey, all over the place. For example, he tried to engineer a romance for one young lady, my daughter, with an olive king in Italy. He tried to stimulate one young man, that'd be my son, to study fish pee. Fortunately, neither of these took hold. But that's totally beside the point. The list of ideas kept coming and coming. He was above all, Jerry was above all, a dreamer. He dreamed of what might be possible and tried to collaborate with others and others' ideas to make us dream, to help us dream. He pushed students and residents to know that the most important question to ask is always why. He always pushed us to ask why. But then as he read and thought late into the night, as he did most nights, he asked even more of himself. He asked, why not? His agenda for those nights, by the way, was milk, cookies, and a book. He described himself as a night-eating gerbil. He was constantly mining his own mind for ideas. One time he thought it would be great to make a series of TV movies on differences in child-rearing practices in different cultures. He wrote a letter to potential funders describing how he envisioned the production, who would be involved, and so on. I bring up this example because of a line in the letter to those funders that captures Jerry. He wrote at the very end of the letter, and I'll quote this, "I have several other ideas for this series. If you give me any encouragement whatsoever, I will deluge you with them." There's no doubt that he did. He encouraged his friends and colleagues to just go for it. Because we were married the same week, same year, he and Ingela, Donna, and I, we took an anniversary trip together every year. One year we were staying at a beautiful inn. After dinner, he noticed a decanter and asked what was in it. "Oh," said the suddenly alert waiter, "something in there that's very special, a very rare brandy from Louis the something or other. There's only a small amount left in the world, and it's very expensive, but it's very, very good. It's made for special people on this very special night." So Jerry bought that. "I'll take two," he said, "one for me, one for my friend." Good memories aren't cheap, he often said. The next morning, I noticed the decanter was just as full as it had been the night before our drinks the night before, obviously having been refilled with that very rare brandy. Jerry was constantly tearing out newspaper and magazine articles, and ever the editor underlining key points, circling fresh ideas, and sending them to friends and colleagues with notes. I'm sure most of you in this room got those. And he just wanted to stimulate us in our interest and to push us in new directions. This was a common one on mine. "Try this, land. You could be a contender." Jerry had so many interests. I mentioned the chocolate chip cookies, but there were so many others. Reading voraciously, beautiful waterfalls, lightning storms, balloons, sandcastles, kites, air shows, magic tricks, basketball, UVM and the Boston Celtics, Larry Bird and Tom Brennan, Joe Montana, any toys that were different, new or old, sleigh rides, riding and skiing and ski vacations. We certainly had a lot of fun on those. Things that go boom, new things and old things, Frank Sinatra, music, brown liquor, kindness. And he loved getting lost. He loved riding around Vermont without a map, always taking the road less traveled by. I'd like to tell you 3 very short stories about Jerry that reflect 3 of the many values that Jerry conveyed to me, and then let you in on Jerry's secret for living a good life. The first value, first story, is wisdom. Here's the story. One summer evening, my wife Donna and I sat on the deck at a cottage in Nantucket, overlooking the ocean with some dear friends. Jerry and Ingela had left earlier that day after visiting as well, and they left as a gift a very expensive bottle of wine. The host suggested we open the wine and toast Jerry, whom the host described as Yoda, the Star Wars figure who knows everything. When the host poured the wine, a large, green, ugly, bloated fly, the same vintage as the wine, came out. As the rest of us sat aghast, the host calmly chugged down the wine, fly and all, toasting, "Well, Jerry knows something the rest of us don't know, so drink up." The late, great Joe Warshaw, former dean of the medical school here and friend to many of you, once made this wonderful comment about Jerry to me when we were having lunch together. "Jerry is the smartest person I ever met who doesn't realize how smart he is." He meant that as the ultimate praise of humility, which brings us to the second value, which is humility. Here's the story. Jerry was often smitten with celebrities. Interesting, I thought, because, most of these had not accomplished nearly as much in life as he had. And because he was also always looking out for those less fortunate, those down in their luck, those with social determinants stacked against them. Anyway, we were once at a very fancy club for dinner in Washington when he noticed a media personality a couple tables over. Wanting to freshen up before meeting her, Jerry dashed to the restroom. When I walked in after him, I shrieked, "Jerry, what are you doing?" Thinking it was a bottle of soap, he was thoroughly washing his face and dabbing his hair with a very strong cologne. Clubman. He tried to wash it off with water. That only made it worse. So we went back to the table. "Jerry, what am I going to do? What am I going to do?" So I said to the waiter, "Can you bring us some lemons?" And he brought back a lemon. I said, No, we need all the lemons you've got in the kitchen." He brought back a big bowl of lemons. So we squeezed. Everybody at the table took a turn, squeezed some lemons. He splashed lots of lemon juice on his face and hair, but it really did not help at all. Undaunted, he walked over and met the lady. Her response was this arm's-length handshake, at best. The third value is compassion. For all his work as a scientist and editor, Jerry was the consummate, caring, and understanding physician. And not just as a physician, he always seemed to try to find ways to help friends and strangers in life. A number of years ago, Jerry had a terrible fall in a New York airport. He tripped and fell over, backwards, head over heels, down an entire escalator, resulting in a skull fracture, a dislocated shoulder, many lacerations, and he almost lost one of his ears. While spending 13 hours, which extended into the wee hours of the morning, in an emergency room noted mostly for its care for street fight-related injuries, Jerry was placed in a very crowded room with men with gunshot wounds and police escorts. Busy medical personnel darted in and out, rudely giving little or no understandable explanation to these patients as to what was happening to them. Diagnosis, testing, what's going on with me? Typical Jerry, he befriended his journey mates and their police escorts and crawled off his bed, and as he described it, with his old white fanny hanging out of his hospital gown, and by the way, with spinal fluid leaking from his nose, and he went from bed to bed to explain to each patient what was going on with them and what to expect next. I just love that story about Jerry. Wisdom, humility, and compassion. So I'd like to pass on now Jerry's 3 secrets for living a good life. He reinforced them to me many times and passed them on to each of my children, his godchildren. Our dogs were also his god dogs. Neither our kids nor his dogs ever learned one single thing about formal religion from Jerry. But they did learn how to be good people and good dogs, and to be kind and generous, and to ask why and why not. So these are the three criteria. Number one, find something you love to do, something you love to do so much that you would do it even if you weren't paid for it. Jerry certainly found that for himself in his passion for medicine and helping other people, especially the most vulnerable, those premature babies. Number two, find a wonderful place to live to do that something and then stay there. Jerry found his spot in Vermont, in New England, and stayed despite many offers to head up larger children's hospitals around the country. And the third, find a person, a soulmate, to share this with. Jerry certainly found that person in Angela. They were a wonderful team, helping each other to share this magnificent journey of theirs. Those of us who worked and played with Jerry are so glad he came and stayed in New England. Prince of light, indeed. Jerry was above all a dreamer who liked to help others to dream. He taught me more about life than anyone. He was my ultimate mentor. To paraphrase a line from one of his favorite movies, Cider House Rules, if any of you can remember back to that movie, in the wonderful scene where actor Michael Caine, a.k.a. Dr. Wilbur Larch, says goodnight to the boys in the orphanage. Good night, you Prince of Light, you King of New England. So this was a life that I never wanted to see end. I just really wanted Jerry to live forever. If he touched your life and heart as he did mine, remember him. And remember why. Thanks to Jerry. Louis will now come up and talk about some of his medical accomplishments and some personal thoughts.
Well, thank you, Buzz. Well, I'm honored to be able to give everyone a sense of just who Jerry Lucey was, is, and will always be. It's a daunting task to capture the life of a pediatric legend that you just began to hear about in such a short period of time. And as I thought about how to do this, I kept thinking, Lucey, Lucey, Lucey. And suddenly, the focus and the objectives for my brief remarks became quite clear. So, over the next several minutes, I'd like to help you take a look at Jerry's early years and how they began to shape his career. I want to help you understand his remarkable contributions as a neonatologist, celebrate his role as an educator and editor, elaborate on what made him so special, and hopefully have you yearn to make a difference in improving the lives of children, just as Jerry always did and always will. So, that's our objectives. Amazing how that worked out. But let's start with Jerry's early years. Baby Jerry. Jerry Lucey was born in 1926 in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and spent most of his youth growing up in Northampton, Massachusetts. Now, he noted in his early history that he provided to the American Academy of Pediatrics that while his parents and grandparents who raised him were not physicians, well, at the age of 6, he remembers being invited by other children to play doctor. Now, perhaps he was outside to play doctor when this picture was taken, yet Jerry tells me that he was the only one who actually wanted to really be the doctor and examine people and make them well, regardless of what other people wanted to play doctor to do. Perhaps he was even helping to play doctor with his dog, as you can see in this picture. Now, while this incident might have been the start of his career and his career aspirations as a physician, he was also greatly influenced by the local primary care physician in Northampton, Massachusetts, and began to really think that a career in medicine might be in the works. In high school, Jerry kept his medical aspirations on a back burner while he was elected president of a senior class, and he played varsity football for 2 years and was also in the drama club. There's football Jerry over there on the far right. His road to medical school, however, was interrupted in his late adolescence when he enlisted while an undergraduate at Dartmouth College in the Naval Aircraft Training Program just as World War II was ending. only to find that the program closed before Jerry ever got a chance to learn to fly. He did get a chance to sail, however, and was sent out to sea on a ship as a seaman first class that was largely filled with crewmen who had just gotten out of the brig, as he told me, and were needed to take the ship to China. For a variety of reasons, that ship never made it to China. Jerry lost 40 pounds on that trip and discovered that a career at sea was not for him due to problems he experienced with seasickness, although he looks pretty good in this picture. Now, Jerry eventually graduated from Dartmouth as a zoology major, and here he was at his graduation, and here he was post-graduation, maybe with a graduation gift or maybe just standing in front of someone else's car. But after graduation, Jerry was accepted and enrolled in the New York University College of Medicine. Here he is with his yearbook picture. And it was during that time that Jerry used his zoology experience and his scientific curiosity to begin to work in various laboratories in the New York City area. One summer in medical school, Jerry joined the laboratory of Dr. Henry Barnett, noted pediatrician at Cornell, where he studied the renal clearance rates of breast milk and formula, comparing that to adults. As part of the experiment, Jerry himself said he would volunteer to drink infant formula, that's it, for 3 straight days, and was pleased to know that he could concentrate his urine better than a preterm infant. According to Jerry, he said that experience in clinical investigation, drinking formula for 3 days, played a key role in his decision to stay in academic medicine, and importantly, to focus his efforts on improving the health of premature or preterm infants. At the conclusion of medical school, Jerry embarked on an internship at Bellevue, where he claimed in his oral biography that he got so good with procedures in the neonatal intensive care unit, or the NICU, that he was able to put an IV into small babies in the dark and do it with his eyes closed, just by feel, which nowadays we only hope that any of us could achieve that achievement, which few, I believe, could do today. Now, Jerry also, while at Bellevue, met an artist, David Smith, while in the emergency room, who asked Jerry if he would pose for a painting called The Intern, which subsequently appeared in a magazine and then in the John Hancock Building in Boston. Here you can see the painting of The Intern. Because of his incredible cognitive aptitude, his clinical and his modeling skills, and his desire to further his research career, he then did his residency at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center from 1953 to 1955. Working with Dr. William or Bill Silverman in what would be Jerry's first randomized trial of different antibiotics for the prevention of newborn infections, Jerry discovered as an incidental finding that babies treated with sulfa drugs that contain sulfa, basically experience something called kernicterus, a type of brain damage due to the excess deposition of bilirubin. You can see the colored areas in the brain slice there in the brain. This event taught Jerry the importance of doing well-run clinical trials and ignited his passion for studying the metabolism of bilirubin and ways to prevent kernicterus. Following residency, Jerry went on to do a research fellowship under the mentorship of Dr. Clement Smith at Harvard and stayed at Boston Children's Hospital. There he discovered the remarkable world of the gun rat, a species lacking a particular enzyme called UDP, glucuronyltransferase, that resulted in this particular rat lacking that enzyme becoming highly jaundiced and developing kernicterus. In 1956, however, Jerry packed up his gun rats and decided to bring them to Burlington, Vermont. Now, he made this decision after coming up and meeting a young doctor, chair of the department, Jim McKay. Took over the department in his 30s at the time, who was so excited to welcome what he hoped would be his second faculty member. He basically showed Jerry around the campus the entire day, but did not tell Jerry he was the chair, just assuming he knew. Such at the end of the day, Jerry turned to Jim and said, "This has been great, but when can I meet your father, the department chair?" Jim explained he was the chair, and their friendship bloomed from there. Despite Charlie Janeway, who was the chair of pediatrics at Boston Children's Hospital, who basically, hearing that Jerry might actually come to Vermont, said to him, "Jerry, you go to Vermont and you will disappear and never be heard of again." Well, I guess that was not true for Jerry, just as it was not true for Jim McKay, who came through that institution, nor for me and perhaps others in this room as well. In fact, Boston tried to recruit Jerry back on several occasions, but Vermont and Jim McKay countered. And as Jim McKay writes in a letter to a friend discussing his holding on to Jerry Lucey, you can see it here, while that Boston position was a desirable one to be newborn director at the Beth Israel Hospital, we promoted Jerry to associate professor at a salary of $12,000 a year, so our university thinks as highly of Jerry as I do. Wow. And Jerry took the deal. Perhaps Jerry's most famous contribution to chroniculous research, however, began in the late 1960s when he read a small case series published in The Lancet describing 9 babies in Great Britain who were treated with this thing called phototherapy, and their jaundice disappeared. He then went on to set up the first randomized controlled trial of phototherapy in this country, described the success of this therapy, and as a result, popularized its use so that it is continuing to be used to today. I mean, think of the millions of babies whose lives and prevention of kernicterus has happened because of bringing that trial and phototherapy to this country. It's also worth noting that Jerry's use of the randomized controlled trial with Dr. Silverman and then as an independent investigator here in Vermont were some of the first forays of this randomized controlled trial technique in clinical research and made the randomized controlled trial itself a gold standard upon which so many discoveries in pediatrics, let alone medicine, have been established. Jerry received numerous awards for this work, discovered a type of transient familial hyperbilirubinemia that bears his name, but most notably, he developed the first set of what we call Billy lights in this country that Jerry fashioned, put into our neonatal intensive care unit to help the babies here in Vermont. That device is now part of the Smithsonian Institute's collection of historical medical devices that you can find in Washington, D.C. But as you may or may not know, Jerry did not stop his exploration of neonatal physiology with his work on bilirubin. As Buzz just said, he had ideas. While in Germany in the mid-1970s, Jerry learned about transcutaneous oxygen and carbon dioxide monitoring of blood gases. That's the little thing they put on your finger to read your oxygen level sometimes when you stop by the emergency room, etc. And he brought this device back to the United States for another set of randomized controlled trials, establishing this mode of non-invasive monitoring as the standard of care, again, in this country and in the world. Here you see the testing of the transcutaneous device on the infamous Space Monkey ham, that's on the left, and then Jerry decided to supervise its being tested as well at the Washington, D.C. Zoo, where it was a success, and then came forward and was tested again in our neonatal intensive care unit and in other centers around the country and the world. A third example of the randomized controlled trial that was pioneered here in Vermont involved the use of artificial surfactant, a surface-active lipoprotein complex, substance that reduces the surface tension of fluids in the air sacs of preterm infants who are not old enough to manufacture this particular substance themselves, enabling them by pouring this down into their lungs to breathe more easily. Jerry, realizing that he needed more than our neonatal intensive care unit to show this effect, ran this trial in 8 hospitals in Europe, 16 in the United States, and he again revolutionized the care of premature lung disease with this artificial replacement therapy trial, with significant drops that have subsequently resulted in the death rate of preterm infants by over 30% with just this discovery alone. It was with this sense of recognizing the importance of collaboration to improve outcomes that after a sabbatical at Oxford in England, Jerry decided to establish a national and international network of neonatal intensive care units to improve the quality of care and to be settings for further randomized controlled trials, and thus the Vermont-Oxford network was born. Initially, 30 hospitals were brought together thanks to a generous grant from the Ronald McDonald Research Foundation. But those 30 have grown into 1,200 plus, I believe. Is that right, Jeffrey? NICUs nationally and internationally, and Vaughan is now recognized as the gold standard, a lot of gold standards when you talk about Jerry, for quality improvement outcomes research for high-risk neonates in the world, making Vaughan really the foundation for the field of evidence-based medicine in neonatology. Thus, Jerry's contributions to neonatology through his work on bilirubin, transcutaneous blood gas monitoring, artificial surfactant, and the Vermont-Oxford network, not to mention how many other ideas he had that stimulated the work of others in areas like cooling of the brain for brain hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain, would more than earn him a legacy to be proud of. But there's more. For you see, Jerry was also a consummate educator and teacher. and demonstrated that with more than 160 papers, 6 edited books, multiple chapters in 11 different texts, multiple films and videos that you heard a little bit about, a legendary department continuing medical education course for general pediatricians, and the largest exclusively neonatal continuing medical education course in the world, affectionately known as Hot Topics, that under his leadership was viewed as not just the largest course for neonatologists, but the best. More than 1,500 neonatologists would attend this course each year. With the help of Ingela, I mean, many people would make this thing happen. But basically, Jerry ran it with attendees coming first from around the United States and then 30 plus other countries from around the world for this course called Hot Topics. But perhaps Jerry's record-breaking performance as an educator is best noted by his record-breaking role as editor-in-chief of the American Academy of Pediatrics peer-reviewed journal Pediatrics for 35 years. During these 3+ decades under his leadership, the journal underwent an extraordinary period of growth and development thanks to Jerry's creativity, his energy, his dedication, and the fairness that Jerry showed in his quest to make this journal the premier publication in our field, and he did. Just look at some of the impressive statistics. That's just the print volume. He started the online volume, the translated editions, has the long and holds the title as longest run for editor-in-chief. And he put pediatrics in the top 100. There are 8,500 peer-reviewed journals. Pediatrics remains the only one in the top 100. And Jerry wanted that to occur and made that happen. Then there are the personal milestones as well. So many, just to even name a few, I have to get them on more than one slide, that he basically achieved. Remarkable awards throughout his career. For example, the Humboldt Award, given to an American in Germany for outstanding contributions to science. The Ronald McDonald Charities Award, which was used to start Vermont Oxford. The first endowed professorship in our department, the Harry Wallace Endowed Professorship. He was the recipient of. The Virginia Apgar Award, the highest neonatal award from the Academy, the highest education award from the Academy, and the Lifetime Achievement Award. He was inducted into the Institute of Medicine, now the National Academy of Medicine, Engineering, and Sciences. He received the Lifetime Achievement from our Vermont Medical Society, the Alfred I. DuPont Award, given to one person in the world for excellence in children's health. He had the Gerald F. Lucey Chair in Neonatal Medicine, which you'll hear about a little bit in a bit, and received probably the MVP award in academic pediatrics, the John Howland Award from the American Pediatric Society, the highest award that is given to someone who is a legend in academic pediatrics. Then there are the personal milestones from students, fellows, residents who are fortunate to work with him, offering comments over the past 50+ years. You can see them on the slide. Great role model. I love his door is always open, and it's true. He answers his phone almost, I mean, you would call and you would expect, I'm going to call Jerry Lucey, and he'd say, hello, and it would be Jerry. Just Jerry. Despite all of these things, it was just Jerry. And I could share with you many, many comments as well from colleagues and friends, but you'll hear some of those, I'm sure, as the morning goes on. Yet despite the many professional accomplishments, there also were the personal accomplishments. For example, there's Jerry the husband, as you heard, to his wonderful wife, Ingela, father to his son, Patrick, who's here today, as well to 3 other children, Colleen, David, on the far right, Kate, as well as 4 grandchildren from his children, Molly, Chloe, Ben, Sam, and 4 great-grandchildren, Nikhil, Avery, Noel, and Naomi. Then there were Jerry's personal accomplishments as the consummate athlete. Jerry the football, Jerry and Ingela, the football players. Jerry the skier. Jerry trying the game of golf. Jerry playing a little baseball. Jerry doing something. We have many comments of what that, does anybody know what was that? Skittles, okay. Skittles, all right. Jerry the falconer. Okay. There we go. And also Jerry as the consummate fan, getting ready to go to some game somewhere, probably UVM or the Celtics, and certainly headed down to Boston or to the Vermont basketball game that he loved so much. Now forgive me if I get a bit personal for a moment, but I need to express my own gratitude to Jerry. There is no way that I would have left Boston Children's Hospital in 1994 and ended up in Vermont if Jerry had not had the vision, and I would say the guts, to take the risk and recommend that I be presented to the search committee here in Vermont when I wasn't even looking for a job. It was his idea. And so my gratitude to Jerry is heartfelt for all he did to open the department, the state, this camp, to open pediatrics in Vermont to me, and also for opening so many other opportunities to me, such as the opportunity, and it is such an honor to follow in his footsteps, and they were huge footsteps to fill, as the subsequent editor of Pediatrics, and for being a mentor and a true friend to me since the moment I arrived, when he said, get in the car, we're going to visit every pediatrician in Vermont. You have to meet everybody. And it was Jerry, he says, they won't believe you, but they'll believe me. And if it were not for Jerry, my street credibility would never be what it is, and I owe you that. I mean, he's with me and made all the difference in the world. So I hope that gives you an idea of who Jerry Lucey was, is, and will always be about. Someone who during his more than 55 years of his professional career saw what others could not, and in doing so invested the time, the energy, and the dedication to make the outcome even better for all parties concerned. In fact, to wrap up this intro this morning, I thought I would recite, I'm not going to sing, but I would recite the words to a song I did sing when Jerry received the Howland Award, which was a very, very special occasion that I was many of us were so honored to be at, let alone a part of. The tune I sang to at that time was the title song from the Broadway show Mame, originally with lyrics by Jerry Herman, but with rewritten lyrics by me that I think are probably more relevant today than they even were that evening. And these are the lyrics. We all salute you, Jerry. Our horns we toot, Jerry. Your achievements were ones that do inspire. You did so much, Jerry, so many lives touched, Jerry. With Billy Lights, you hit new heights, and that we all admire. Neonates are better, Jerry. You were a go-getter, Jerry. So many of your ideas made a diff. Keeping babies mellow, Jerry, so that they don't turn yellow, Jerry. Allow them to go home in just a jiff. We owe you a ton, Jerry, thanks to Vaughn, Jerry. More than 1,200 NICUs each day improve their care. As editor-in-chief, Jerry, it's our belief, Jerry, your 35 years in charge of peds were unique and very rare. So this morning, we're here, Jerry, because it's you we revered, Jerry. You will always be someone we all adored, but there's more. You were, are, and will be the best, Jerry. Way above all the rest, Jerry. Jerry, you've taught us all to see how much you made neonatal and department history, and so we carry forward your legacy. We miss you. I miss you. Love you. Thank you, Jerry.
So nothing meant more to Jerry than passing on the torch in neonatology. His favorite mentees, his very favorite ones, are our next speakers. I'm just going to mention their names, and they'll come up in this order to offer their thoughts. Jeffrey Horbar is the Chief Executive and Scientific Officer for Vermont Oxford Network. He's the Gerald F. Lucey Professor of Neonatal Medicine here at UVM. Then Roger Soule, President of Vermont Oxford Network, and the Harry Wallace Professor of Neonatology here at UVM. George Little, Emeritus Professor of Pediatrics and Obstetrics and Gynecology at Dartmouth, Jerry's first mentee, really, in neonatology here in Vermont. And Alistair Phillip, dear friend. Alistair, Emeritus Professor of Pediatrics and Neonatology at Stanford School of Medicine. Jeffrey?
Thank you, Buzz, and thank you, Ingela and Louis, for arranging this incredible opportunity for all of us to honor Jerry's tremendous contributions to the field of neonatology. I had the incredible privilege of working closely with Jerry for about 40 years. Every single day I had the opportunity to observe his incredible mind in action, see the ideas that were constantly coming up faster than any of us could possibly process them. And Of course, being the first Gerald Lucey professor is the greatest honor that I've ever received. Lewis explained many of Jerry's scientific achievements and his real brilliance as a clinician and clinical scientist. I'd like to focus on a different aspect of Jerry's genius, his social genius. Buzz alluded to this a little bit. Some of you may be familiar with the term social physics. Well, Jerry was the most brilliant social physicist that I have ever known. He understood that any endeavor to succeed, scientific or otherwise, required a foundation of social interactions and personal relationships that would actually drive the endeavor to success. When Jerry organized the first meeting of what was later to become the Vermont-Oxford Network, he chose to do it at Lincoln College in Oxford, England. We lived together, worked together, ate together in that incredible setting in Oxford, and it was the relationships that were formed in that early encounter that really have survived to this day and were the core for the Vermont-Oxford Network. After that meeting, Jerry used a phrase that Buzz alluded to: there are no cheap memories. And the way I've come to understand and interpret that statement of Jerry's is that you need to invest in those social aspects, personal relationship aspects that are so crucial to achieving the kinds of success that Jerry always had in mind. Hot topics in neonatology that Lewis mentioned was totally based on his understanding of social physics and the way of engaging people in developing those close personal relationships. And the Vermont-Oxford Network has grown from that initial small group in Lincoln College to, as Lewis said, 1,200 NICUs around the world. That would never have happened if we hadn't understood, based on Jerry's insights, the importance of creating something like that based on personal relationships and social networks. So thank you, Jerry, for everything that you taught me over those years, for all the lessons that I learned from you, and of course for all of the enormous contributions that you have made to the field of neonatology and pediatrics. And I'd like to end by thanking Ingela and Colleen and David and Kate and Patrick and the entire Lucey family, because I think without all of you, Jerry would never have achieved these contributions, and I hope you understand that to a large extent those are your contributions as well. And as a result of that, all of you will always be very valued members of our worldwide community of pediatrics and neonatology. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Roger Saul, and like many of you, someone who is deeply indebted to Jerry for so much of what has happened in my life. And I'd like to echo Jeff's sentiments of thanking Lou, Buzz, and Ingela for arranging this fantastic ceremony to celebrate Jerry's life. We've heard a great deal about Jerry's incredible contributions to the science and the world of neonatology. And as Lou was going through them, the fact is my mind is still buzzing with just how many more there are to share. But actually what I'd like to speak to is more Jerry's joy of living. And I'd like to just share one brief anecdote of the day I met Jerry, which to me has always stayed with me, emblematic of that joy. I came here to interview for my fellowship, coming off my public health service on an Indian reservation in Bellevue Hospital, one of Jerry's stomping grounds. Most people looked at me coming to this situation out of residency training as an aberration, someone who didn't deserve much attention, but not Jerry. He liked odd ducks. He liked things that came out of left field. When I came here, I'm doing the math. Jerry was 56 and I was 28. As is typical in these interviews, Jerry asked me, "What would you like to do with your career?" I gave it some thought and told Jerry, "I'd like your job." As you know, Jerry is unflappable. And I was a little bit manipulative because I knew at 56 he wasn't threatened by a 28-year-old. I was telling him, I thought you've got the best goddamn job in the world. At the time, his office was on Shepperson 6, and he had a view of Mount Mansfield, and he turned around, gazed at Mansfield, and looked back at me, and he said, "It's not a bad job." Jerry took a chance on me, cheeky as I was, and over the years, along with so many of you, gave so much of his time and his thought to developing my career, the career of many of us around, and the world, the community of neonatology that Jeff alluded to. And of course, as time went on, he prepared me well, and I had his job. And so he'd see me in the halls, and he'd look at me with that fantastic twinkle in his eye and that smile, and he'd say, "How's that job working out for you?" And all I can say back today harkens back to Jerry's words about the principle that you should do things you think are important with people you like to work with. And Jerry put so many of us on the path to things that we hope are important. And we all know how much we loved working with Jerry. So thank you.
(1963-4) academic year of. I'm wet behind the ears medical student on going to pediatrics. And where was pediatrics? Baird 5 at that time or some such place? Where was it? Smith, okay. So anyway, it's about this time of year, as I remember correctly, and I go to pediatrics. It's about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening, and I'm looking around at what to do, and I was a little bit nervous and so forth, so I decided I'd go play with a child over on the floor. So I was over on the floor playing with this child, and who comes in the door? White coat with a little bit of a flurry, but Jerry Lucey. And he looks at me, and I know what's going through his mind. He says, "What is that guy doing down there on the floor?" And I'm sitting there on the floor looking up at him and saying, "Now what am I doing sitting here on the floor?" That's my first encounter with Jerry. It lasted, obviously, through medical school, residency, fellowship, being advised all along through this path. He came to my wedding in Plattsburgh to Carol, who was a medical student, and sort of nurtured that relationship. I went to Colorado, and he more or less told me what to do there. And then he told me to come back and go to Dartmouth because his friend Saul Blattman was taking the job down there that Jerry didn't take at Dartmouth to be chair. And I end up down there, and I end up continuing this friendship and relationship. And it was really, really spectacular. One other thing that I remember for this continuation of this relationship is when I came back from Africa and I grew a beard. And Jerry looks at me and he says, "You've got a beard." Now, this is the time of the Vietnam War and all those things are going on, you know. He took me by the hand, took me down to the laboratory, and set up the rest of the week. I had to come in every day, swab my beard, plate it out, read it, and then report back to Jerry with the results. And then write a little report on the results of swabbing my beard. Normal skin flora, by the way. So I've got a few minutes here to just sort of help us continue and help myself process all of our thoughts about what was he. I know we've heard some magnificent thoughts from Lou and Buzz and so forth. I finally decided that I would just try to mention a couple of attributes, and these attributes are part of what we've already heard and what I know we're going to hear from some of the rest of you, in which we've read in the program. The first one deals with a concept that a friend of mine at Dartmouth presented to me, and that's called the sanctity of work. And it's a really interesting concept if you read something about it. It means special things about people and the work responsibilities that we have. And Jerry really embodied that. And it would flash up in sudden ways. And Roger was talking about, age differentials and so forth. And obviously, Jerry and I had an age differential, not as much as Roger's, and certainly a status thing and so forth. I can remember when Jerry and I were walking down the hall, and he had been down in Boston the day before, and he came back, and he had a twinkle in his eye. And he said to me, "I think I'm going to be the editor of Pediatrics." It was just a marvelous thing. That was part of what he represented and the way in which he went about doing everything. The other thing is that back before computers, manuscripts used to arrive in the mailroom. And Jerry and I often, and he had this thing that he said, if you really want to get to know somebody, if you want to evaluate somebody, don't sit down with a checklist, have a cup of coffee with him at least once a week. So I'd be down having my weekly cup of coffee with Jerry, and he would go to the mailroom himself and pick up the manuscripts twice a day, right? That was the passion, the sanctity, if you will, that was involved in what he did. And not only that, he'd take me with him. And then later that afternoon, or maybe the next morning, he'd come in and, what do you think of this paper? That was just being with him. Visiting, Lou was talking about visiting hospitals. I used to do transport conferences with him because he and I set up the Vermont, New Hampshire perinatal program. We'd go around to hospitals. He loved that. He absolutely loved going and doing transport conferences around the state of New Hampshire and Vermont. That's the passion. That's the sanctity of work. That's what served as a guide for me, and I think for most of us in the room. The second thing that has come out already, but which I'd just like to focus on, is the attribute of relationships with people, and especially with family. I mean, this guy talked to all of us, but I used to thought that I was the only one, but he really talked to everybody about his family. He would come in and he'd say what had gone on, what his hopes were. That was part of his life. That was part of his teaching. At least that's what he taught me. And to just give an example of the fact that what a leader he was in that, this thing emerged in neonatology, and I think to some extent in all of pediatrics and medicine in general. I know in medicine in general, the whole thing about family-centered care. Well, family-centered care started out in Vermont in a meeting, a conference out at Shelburne Farms, which I came up and sat in and so forth. And it went on to a whole process of another meeting, a grant proposal, production of a movie, and all of that. But the real key to family-centered care, so far as I was concerned, was that Jerry met this woman, Helen Harrison, who was a bit of a character, who died not too long ago, by the way, and whose obituary was in the New York Times. But Jerry really mentored her and moved her along, brought her to Hot Topics, and made her a part of Hot Topics, which people would wonder about, and so forth and so on. But he also published Principles of Family-Centered Care, which Helen was a primary author and worked with a bunch of people. And he published an editorial with it. And basically what he said in the editorial was, this paper was too important not to be published immediately, and I authorized it being published without going full review. And there it was. It was that was how he used the system. That's how he used his energy. That's how he used his respect and his involvement with families. Farringdon Manor in the UK, on the edge of the Cotswolds. Invited to go with Jerry to a few days that he spent there. And he invited some people to come, and he did this frequently, skiing, right? And Farringdon, and of course what Jerry wanted to do is he wanted people to come down for breakfast and sit there and talk for the day. And that's what it was all about. But something else was going on there that I didn't become aware of until I guess we got there, was that at the time there was a bit of a controversy going on in the UK about how do you detect problems with Munchausen by proxy and so forth. And there was a man in the UK, David Southall, who I met again recently in Dakar, who was basically under examination. What I understand is the UK has a system where you have, instead of only internal service in the hospital, you can get involved in a commission, or a commission examines you. And David was invited to that, despite the fact that at the time he was really under a pressure. That's the way Jerry went through his entire life. That's what I learned from him. That's what we've all learned from him. And I know all of you have had these kind of experiences. I wrote down to mention this statement that's already been made about Jerry saying, get the best training possible, find a good job, be with great people in a beautiful environment, and stay there. Now, Buzz or somebody had said that. That really was a theme that I've used many times, and which I certainly think is part of the process, and what many ways that we learned as life mentors of Jerry's. And certainly he was a mentor for me for my life. The last thing I'd like to just point out is that the first time that I met Jerry was in 1963. The last time I met Jerry was just before he left the hospital here to go back to Florida. And Carol and I were up on some room not too far. It's interesting, after 50 some odd years, my first contact with Jerry and my last contact with Jerry was just a few feet apart. And we had met, Ingela was there, a bunch of people there, David was there. By the way, please note that David Lucey is wearing his tie, right? There you go. RCT tie, randomized control trial. And it came time to leave, and for Carol and I to go back home down to southern Vermont, and there was discussion about how Jerry was going to get down to Florida and all that aspect of it. And I snuck in to see him just before leaving, and sort of a final goodbye, because I think both of us knew that this was probably going to be the last time, or might be anyway. I don't think we wanted it, but we certainly didn't want it, but we sort of had that feeling. And Jerry looked at me and said, "Stop. Turn around. Go back." I wish we could go back, but that was his sort of signal. You know, all the time he had been encouraging me, and there he was saying to me, "George, stop, turn around, go back, and join everybody else, and continue on."
Most of you must think that I'm being very informal, dressed like this rather than in a suit. However, I just want to say that this is really in honor of Jerry, because he and I met in Hawaii. I was the first neonatologist in Hawaii, and Jerry came out in 1971 as a visiting professor, largely at the instigation of the chairman of pediatrics at the time, Harry Shirky. There was a very good visiting professor program in Hawaii. It was really difficult to persuade people to come out there to spend a few weeks with no responsibilities and just to teach for half a day. So Jerry was in that category. It turned out that Jerry happened to meet Ingela in Hawaii in 1971. And just parenthetically, I met George Little in 1971 because I went to the high-risk infant care course in Denver, Colorado, and he was a fellow in Denver at that time. So there were certain things that have brought us all together. The thing that subsequently happened was that I was pondering the possibility of moving back to the East Coast. In case you can't detect, since it's been so many years, I originally grew up in the UK, but I've been over here so long that sometimes one forgets that one's roots are from back then. But anyway, Jerry was aware that I had some interest, and he persuaded me to look at a couple of other jobs. And finally, there was a position that was made available at the UVM. And subsequently, he persuaded me, great difficulty, to interview here, and I did that. And when I moved to Vermont, it was in 1974. And I stayed here until 1980. During those 6 years, I probably had either coffee or lunch with Jerry every day when he was in town. Of course, he did a lot of traveling to speak elsewhere. But on at least some of those occasions, Colleen would be at dinner table. Well, I shouldn't say dinner, I should say lunch table or luncheon. And Jerry was always willing to share his family. David came by occasionally as well. And it just was a natural thing for him. Our coffee meetings consisted of either 2 to 12 people. There was a natural tendency when we went down for morning coffee for people to congregate to listen to the ideas that Jerry had that day. I mean, I always refer to him as the ideas man. And subsequently, I think I almost thought of him as the bionic man, because as many of you know, he had 2 artificial knees and 2 artificial hips to go along with his lanky body. I did just jot a couple of things down. You've all heard his favorite phrases, and being a somewhat parsimonious Scot, my children were very quick to acknowledge the motto that Jerry used, which was, "Who needs cheap memories?" They would persuade me that it was very easy for me to spend money, even though I had very little at the time. The salary scale at UVM not being what it is now, I'm sure. Another thing, just to talk about, somebody mentioned Jerry's generosity. He had a habit of being involved with people, and there must have been an occasion when he was helping somebody on an aircraft. You know, usually if somebody faints or something, they say, "Is there a doctor on the plane?" And you would respond. Well, he must have done something like that because after this event, whatever it was, I don't know, he received a putter, and even though there was a photograph of Jerry attempting to play golf, he was not a golfer. Therefore, the putter became my property. And I used it to good effect in the good old days, as Buzz can attest, and Lewis too. Not so much anymore, although I wasn't using that putter, so. The other thing I wanted to say is how much he meant to my family. Jerry could talk about anything. He was, I think, a Renaissance man. I mean, he was so involved in reading this, that, and the next thing. And one of the privileges I had was to present Jerry to the pediatric world when he received the APGAR award. And as I said at that time, he's somebody who shares himself with other people. So just a couple of recollections. Somebody mentioned waterfalls before. When he was in Hawaii, he rented a house that had a miniature waterfall. Ingela probably remembers that. My children remember him pointing out a beaver pond. He took us on journeys to see beaver. I think that was one of his passions. And I just trying to keep things together here. One of the things that he also gave me when I left was a little statue. It was a baby. And that baby has followed me around. It's really quite heavy. It's a lot heavier than most babies are, actually. But he also gave me, somebody also mentioned the view out of the window from Shepperton 6 to Mount Mansfield. And I still have that on tap. So the only other thing I was going to mention is that I don't know whether it was osmosis, but being an editor, I viewed the same thing that George mentioned, which is that he would pick up the mail at least once a day. I don't remember it being twice a day, actually, but that's okay. He loved to do that. And he was also a great reader of the New York Times, which we would go over together to do that. But whether or not his editorial responsibilities rubbed off on me, I don't know. But I subsequently became editor of Neo Reviews and just stepped down from doing that last year. So thank him for that too, and thank all of his family for their friendship. It's been a long time, but it was extremely enjoyable while it lasted. Thank you.
Offering some family remembrances will be two of his children, Colleen Montgomery and then Patrick Lucey.
Thank you all for coming. As I mulled over what I should say today, how to distill the essence of an amazing man who lived a life so much longer than he ever imagined. The process reminded me of that experience that we all had of reading a menu in a restaurant where everything sounds like it would be delicious, and you sort of feel like you could just close your eyes and point and have made a good choice, and that's sort of how I feel about the things that I could say about Dad. There are so many. And everything that I've heard so far today rings true. You know, he really was who he was, and he didn't have a different way of being with one set of people than the others. So, however, Dad was very appreciative of speeches that were short and sweet, and above all, I want to make him proud today. So I'll take some of his best advice. Choose dessert first. So here's a sweet story that says a lot about a remarkable guy. You're going to need some more Kleenex, Chloe. Dad called me one day. He said he wanted to arrange an interview. So would we bring Chloe over to his house for this interview? He was a master at making connections, and many of you in the audience might be thinking of a time that you received such a call and how lucky you were. It may have led to a new job or a new professional connection or a really interesting conversation. Chloe was a toddler at the time, and this interview was with a lovely teddy bear. Dad had a new teddy bear that he wanted to place with someone who would really appreciate the bear. We went to his house. He introduced his bear to Chloe, and then we all watched and waited to see how bear and toddler would get along. That interview went well. Chloe and White Bear formed a legendary, there are more stories about White Bear, lifelong friendship full of love and adventure. And I think this story encapsulates many aspects of the essence of Dad. For one thing, it's a good story, and Dad enjoyed a good story. Hence, he surrounded himself with people who tell good stories. He shared many more stories than dry parental lectures. In search of good stories, Dad was a prolific reader, and he passed that love of reading on to all four of us. He was also a prolific writer, skilled at explaining complex concepts in a clear way, a gift that both David and Patrick have definitely inherited, a fact that Dad noted with pride. The world needs good communicators. In some ways, Dad never quite outgrew childhood. He took toys and teddy bears seriously. Honestly, if that interview had not gone well, he would have kept the teddy bear. He loved whimsy, bright colors, and fun. He never quite saw the point of vegetables, especially if there was ice cream or brownies for dessert. When we were children, Dad's idea of a Sunday well spent was not in church, but it would be start with him saying, "Let's go get lost." That meant piling into the car. This is back when gas was like pennies a gallon, because we're old now. Heading out of town without a map, finding adventure and beautiful views on back roads that we hadn't visited before. Somehow we'd often end up at a creamy stand. We could all do well to keep that sense of wonder and delight in our lives. Dad was well aware that the idea of a teddy bear interview was a little silly. It was a prime example of how he didn't take himself seriously. I think that allowed him to think creatively. Some of his best ideas were possible because he wasn't tied to conventional ways of approaching problems. One of his very best ideas, that early one that infants could be treated with phototherapy instead of blood transfusions, was made possible because he paid attention to the wisdom of the nurses who observed that the babies by the window seemed to do better than the others. That was at a time when nurses were definitely not being asked for their professional medical opinions or advice. I think he was proud to be able to tell that story to Kate. It was a bit of bonding between him and his only child who actually followed him into the medical career, his daughter, the nurse. Life is too short to take ourselves too seriously, even a life as long as 91 years. Finally, the White Bear story. I am really keeping this short. This really is finally. The White Bear story exemplifies Dad's idea of a friendship, lifelong, full of love, fun, and adventure. This room is full of examples of that, not least of which was his marriage with Ingela, that had a fairy tale beginning, talk about good stories, and continued for 46 happy years. He took his many, many friendships very seriously and we could all do well to emulate this aspect of his life. Thank you.
I'd also like to echo Colleen's statement, thanking everyone for being here. It really means a lot. And most of you are here to remember a doctor, a medical researcher, a scientist. To me, he was his dad. But his professional passion obviously did permeate through to his personal life. I think by about 8th or 9th grade, I knew the definition and strategy behind a double-blind clinical trial. And it's from that passion that I wanted to share a brief story. It's the time that my father performed an experiment on me. I was 3 years old at the time, and my mom was out of town, so it was just me and Dad. And he had noticed that I didn't seem too interested in food. So he thought to himself, you know what? I'm not going to give Patrick any food unless he asks for it. At about 2 p.m. that day, I went up to my dad and I said, I'm not feeling so good. And I presume with a straight face he asked me, well, what have you eaten? To which my response, I'm sure, was a bit of a blank confusion and stare as I realized nothing. So, from this experiment and the sample size of 1, my father was able to correctly ascertain that Patrick is not food-driven, and Patrick will probably not be overweight in the future. But besides that little story, I just wanted to share some of my just memories and impressions and what will stay with me, which is having Chinese food, watching the New York Giants or the New England Patriots, and of course, basketball. Everything from Larry Bird and the Celtics, Michael Jordan and the Bulls, to good old Tom Brennan and the Catamounts. And what I will always take with me going forward is the simple grace and decency that is often hard to define, but easy to recognize. And that's how I hope to emulate him every day. So, thank you.
So thanks to all those comments. We now wanted to give just a few minutes for some personal reflection by yourselves with some picture memories of Jerry's life. Okay? So those pictures and others will be on a reel in the other room adjacent to some wonderful piano playing by a well-known person, John Mackenzie, during the refreshment time. So we'd now like to invite any of you who would like to offer other personal memories of Jerry. Louis will have a microphone and come to you if you'd like to offer any. Thanks. Dr. Jim Cherry.
If it's okay, I won't stand up because I'll fall over. Well, I go back even further, and that Jim McKay had the plan, this is 1960-ish, that I would be the third member of the department once I had my fellowship in infectious diseases. Well, that didn't happen because we had a daughter who was deaf, congenitally deaf. And so I wasn't able to come back here. But in 1960, the Army sort of screwed up my life, and I had a year. And so I came here as an instructor, taking Jerry's place for a year. And I had the, and so he had an office at the Degospian and a lab there. And so every Monday morning, I killed 2 gun rats and cut out their livers and did experiments with them on a new machine that Jerry had purchased. And he wanted me to calibrate it. I had no experience at all, but I sort of fussed around with it. And out of that year, I have 2 publications. One presentation at the PAS meetings on familial hyperbilirubinemia, which I was the first author of, and Jerry was the second. And then the third was on the effect of phenothiazines in the mothers, on the effect of, or lack of effect of, the bilirubin in the babies. And so that's my experience now of the 1960, blah, 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 those many years ago.
Thank you, Jim. Almost 60 years. Thanks. Wonderful colleague.
Hi. I was reminded by George Little this morning about the information with Helen Harrison, and that I was this morning listening to the news and they were honoring RFK, and that he made us all listen to opinions that we didn't much want to hear. And that's what Jerry did. Helen Harrison expressed the opinion, and her co-authors, of parents of babies who had been in NICUs who didn't necessarily like what we were all doing at the time with their babies, and they didn't have much say. Jerry also introduced us all through pediatrics to student, and the wise comments therein. Not very, I guess, limited number of people knew who that was, but that was Bill Silverman sharing wisdoms with us all. And then lastly, 2 years ago, I was at a reunion, and I remembered when I graduated, and I noticed a group of people off in the distance, and I asked someone else there, who are those old people over there? And they said, those are people attending their 40th reunion. And I said, well, 2 years ago I attended my 50th. OMG. And at the final luncheon that we all had together, Jerry came to that, and I was amazed that he did. And I sat having lunch, and then I moved over to his table to talk with him. And we exchanged pleasantries for a while. And then the most amazing thing happened. He reached over and took my hand. Maybe 10, 15 seconds. Very special day.
Primeware.
There are a few of us who knew Jerry as long as I did. John Tempest comes to mind, as does George Little. But I first met Jerry as a young intern in 1963 on Smith 4. In the middle of the night when he was doing an exchange transfusion. As I recollect, it was out with the bad and in with the good. I'd like to tell you, but it would be a lie, that he looked up at the flickering fluorescent lights and said, "Eureka." But that didn't happen. And then fast forward a few years, perhaps 20, and we were colleagues in the sense that I was an orthopedic surgeon and I took care of a lot of kids with a variety of children's problems. And one day Jerry appeared and he says, "I want you to operate on me." And I took that as being an extraordinary event in my life. Well, I did operate on him, and I must tell you that about 25 years later, he rather wryly noted, "Well, you didn't really prevent it from aging, did you?" Well, then fast forward again, and then in the 90s when I became dean, I used to go to the curmudgeon table. Bob Dickerman will know what that, Joe Dickerman knows what that is. This was the group that gathered to dissect and whatever else, slice and dice all of the events of the day going on. And I would go there as a dean about once every 3 weeks. It was a great way to get a sense of the pulse of the place. And Jerry would give that little flip of his head and a smile, and he would then eviscerate me. But I had my revenge. And this is the real heart of this story. Mrs. Wallace, as you know, the Wallace Professorship, was very anxious to do something, and Jerry had been really, really stewarding her in the most important ways. And it came to pass that he thought she was ready to be asked, and I was the person to do the ask. So he came to my office and he said, "Now look, she's good for $1 million. Don't ask her for any more." So we got in the car a couple days later and drove out in the evening. And in the way out, he kept saying, "Don't ask for more than $1 million." We got there early, and there was that awkward moment when there seemed to be nothing to be doing, and Mrs. Wallace seemed to be quite antsy. And I said to her, "Us deans do things that we do for the love of country that we shouldn't do." She said, "How would you like to go and have a cigarette?" She says, "Oh, would I?" So we went out onto the back stoop and we sat there chatting, and about 10 minutes later she said to me, she says, "I was really scared about meeting a dean," which is a really important lesson to learn. Titles do have some meaning, I guess. But I said, "So you really would like to do something with Dr. Lowe?" "Oh, yes, I would." I said, "Well, what would you like to do?" She said, "Well, I thought about a professorship." And I said, "Well, do you know what that costs?" And she says, "Well, no." I said, "Well, it's $2 million. Well, she said, "I want to do it." So now we come filing back in, and there's Jerry sitting, and her manager has arrived. And I said to her, "Now, Mrs. Wallace, what would you like to do?" She said, "Well, I want to do a professorship." And I said, "Oh, really?" She says, "Yes." I said, "Well, that's $2 million. Well, you'd have thought Jerry had been shot." I mean, he noticeably blanched. He looked like he was going to pass out. And she looked toward her manager and she says, "Can we do that?" He said, "Yep." And it was done. So I've got to last before you get too antsy here, Louis. I've got. That's perfectly. Yeah, no, the last point was that Jerry was a consummate clinician teacher as well as a researcher, and that is what I admired. But it came time to hire a new professor and chair. And we had some pretty high-powered heads of hospitals, and there was this squirt from Boston. I won't say who it was, but a young man. And I was really kind of toying because he was a clinician teacher, which I really liked. And so I knew I had to have the full-time faculty and the community faculty on the team. And what happened was quite simple. Jerry Lucey
Buzz Land sort of took that mantle on, and with the help of Mary Ellen Avery, we made the deal. Now, it seems all so obvious now, but let me tell you, it was a gamble at the time. So anyway, Jerry was a fabulous guy who obviously had a huge impact on everybody in this room and on this institution and on the hospital, so God bless Jerry.
Thank you, John. John, you know, instead of a cigarette, you should have smoked a cigar. You might, a little bigger prize. Correct.
Can we go from one dean to another dean?
Sure.
Dean Morin.
Well, my story will be shorter. This is about the first, really around the first time I met Jerry, and that was when I was a medical student. It would have been 1975, I think, and I was coming up here to interview for pediatric residency position, and I knew about Jerry because Joe Warshaw was the chief of neonatology at Yale at the time, and he had talked about, and he did a lot of metabolism type things, and Billy Rubin was one of the things he talked about in the new ideas and that, and so I knew there was this famous guy up there, so I was, and I'd never been to Vermont. I'd never met Jerry, but I came in to interview for residency. I didn't know who I was going to be talking to, but it turned out to be Jerry, which was great. And, you know, he had the big look like that, you know, the big smile. And he took me around the intensive care nursery and showed me he had, at that point in that nursery, they had installed Billy lights in the ceiling itself to come down, and sort of regaled me with some other stories about what they were doing there, and it was really, and he was like, I was actually finishing my residency round of interviewing. This was, as I recall, it was the last place, and it was by far the most warm, welcoming. You know, it was sort of amazing. I remember coming into, I don't know, one of the buildings here was a big fire burning. You know, it was across the green here someplace, and it was this amazing sort of warmth that you saw. And now I didn't end up matching here, but it was. There were all these connections over the years. I saw Jerry. You know, I'd go to Hot Topics. I spoke at Hot Topics a few times. He was invited me to do that. And then there was this sort of the strange thing where the Joe Warshaw, who had been my chief, became the dean here. And 10 years or so later, I sort of followed up on Joe, and when I was being recruited, Jerry was a really important part of that. I remember sitting out. They did a really good job for recruiting. And one of the places was Jerry took you out to his place up on the bluff overlooking the lake, and we sat out and had like an afternoon, talk and some food, and we're sitting there and looking out across, and the sun's coming down on the other side. It was the perfect situation, and I thought somebody said this is one of the prettiest views in Vermont, and I said, wow, I would say in the world. I remember exactly that. The only place I'd seen like that before was like some of the lakes up in high altitude in Switzerland, and it just that was a big important part of my thinking about this. Is this is a beautiful state, and I realized from all the associations through Jerry that, and in pediatrics, it has a ridiculously high impact sort of per capita. I mean, it's 10 to 100 to 1, which you should have the impact it has nationally from the size of the state and the size of the department, which is a really remarkable thing. And Jerry was a lot of the beginning of that being true. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Kathy Leahy, and I'm a nurse. I was a nurse in the NICU for years, and then became the first neonatal nurse practitioner thanks to Dr. Lucey. We had sort of a bond, Leahy, Lucey. We're kind of the Irish mafia in the nursery there. And but I just wanted to express my gratitude that he had the foresight to believe in the neonatal nurse practitioner role and supported me, paid the tuition. I wouldn't have been able to afford that on a nurse's salary. Not that I'm making any union statements here, but I just, I thought it was great. I also house sat for the trifecta. I did for Dr. McKay, Dr. Lucey, and Dr. Phillip when I was in my 20s. So it was, I felt a special bond with all of them, but he really had a lot of foresight and was an innovator.
Thanks, Kathy. Lou Mort Wasserman has some.
Dr. Wasserman.
So I just wanted to mention a couple of things that haven't been mentioned. One is that I hated the NICU. Just despise it. We did 6 months when I was an intern. And, but Jerry Lucey was a wonderful, he was wonderful to residents. I remember him coming in the middle of the night when some kid was dying, dressed with a tie, looking really well, and helping out with the family, which was just wonderful. He was very supportive to residents. He was supportive to those of us who had careers that were not in neonatology. Very supportive to me, gave me advice about dealing with the Academy of Pediatrics, which came in handy. And final thing is, he had an appreciation for research that was not clinical trials. I remember him talking to me about the kind of research that was important, where you basically picked up the rock and saw what crawled out. Descriptive research that identifies new problems. And I took that with me, and I've quoted him many times about that.
Thanks, Mort. Others who would like to share a thought?
We were friends with Ingela and with Jerry. And what we found interesting about Jerry is he had a great memory for everything. Everything that had undergone to his life from the day he was born. And he was a great historian. And our daughter ended up living in Northampton. And Jerry lived in almost every house in Northampton, it turns out.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, thank you all. We'll thank Ingela and the Lucey clan and all friends and colleagues, and hope that people can continue to share some stories or thoughts or just hugs. As you do walk out of the room again, there will be one of Donna's chocolate chip cookies, and again, I'll say savor that with Jerry in mind. So thank you all for being here this morning. Hey, Don.